The last waning days of summer bring an excitement mingled with melancholy we all can agree on. These are the last days of carefree fun, the last days of late nights, the last days of summer. For Kevin Ives and Don Henry, these were their last days. The innocence of youth was about to run headlong into corruption, greed, violence, and ultimately death. No one knows what happened to Kevin and Don in those final hours. At least no one is admitting to it. Their deaths were the tip of an iceberg that went deeper than anyone could imagine. Today, we venture into the murky deaths of Kevin Ives and Don Henry. The boys on the track. Although it's it's kind of a weird thing. They were friends for a few months, not a year maybe, and who knows how long they would have been friends. But now they're kind of linked together forever. Mm-hmm. It's kind of sad, and they're linked together forever because at around 4 a.m. Sunday morning, so late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, 4 a.m. 23rd of August, 1987, they were hit by a train. They had told they were staying the night with Don Henry's parents, his dad and stepmother, and they had come back. They'd been in town in Little Rock, in the big town of Little Rock, Saturday night, came home. Their dad said be home by 10. They got home at 10. They wanted to go out.
They went spotlighting.
Spotlighting, yeah. And Dad said, he knew that Don knew that area and said, be back by midnight.
Typical, very teenage Arkansas kid, boys.
1987 rural Arkansas teenagers.
Yeah.
So, he woke up the next morning. They weren't there. So he went to look for them because he knew Don at least should have, he knew his kid would be home. He didn't find him in the local haunt, so he went back into that area as far as he could go with a car. And he ran up on a sheriff's deputy and he said, "Hey, you seen a couple of teenage boys out here?" And the deputy was real suspicious. The deputy kind of walked up to him and said, "Who are you looking for?" And he, thinking maybe those kids got arrested for doing something wrong, didn't want to say, "Oh, they've been out here all night spotlighting." So he was like, "Oh, they're probably not here. Never mind," and left. And had went and called his Kevin Ives' mother, Linda Ives, and said, "Hey, are the boys with you?" And she said, "No, I thought they were with you." So they knew something was up. So what had happened around 4 a.m. that Sunday morning, a UP, Union Pacific train was going down some tracks north of Don's house, Don Henry's house. The conductor was named Jerry Tomlin, engineer Stephen Troyer, and brakeman Danny DeLamar. It was a three-man crew. Those headlights on those trains are super bright. And they saw something that looked like a shadow on the tracks ahead of them. As they looked at it a little bit more, they saw it was two bodies covered with a tarp. Both the heads were between the tracks, and it's kind of their thighs were over the tracks. So they weren't over both tracks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was a tarp that covered them from about the waist down. There was a rifle behind one of them on the other side of the tracks behind his head. Of course, they laid on the brakes, laid on the horn, but the kids didn't move. I mean, they didn't even flinch. Those trains take a long time to stop, and they didn't have near enough time to stop. So they hit these two bodies going pretty good speed. He said they looked relaxed, is what Jerry Tomlin kept saying. They looked asleep. They didn't even move. Once they did stop, and it's obviously at this stretch going to get kind of graphic. What a train does to a body. Mm-hmm. But Jerry stayed on the train to report it, and the other 2 got off to go see, One of the things they quickly noticed was the color of your blood is, they knew what blood looks like, and they were hunters. They were Arkansas hunters, so, and they thought it looked off. That was the indication that they gave. Tomlin later admitted that night, I smelled a rat. So Deputy Chuck Talent and Lieutenant Ray Richmond with the Saline County Sheriff's Office are the first ones on the scene. And they immediately say, it looks like a suicide. There's really no indication of that. Like, there was a Arkansas State Trooper who was in the area and heard about it, and he shows up at the scene too, Trooper Wayne Lanehart. And he said the first thing you do when you find anything even remotely suspicious is you assume homicide and work your way away from that. And he said that they absolutely did not work that case right. One of the things they did was, have you ever seen those where they take the pictures of all the things and they have all the little rulers laying beside and all that?
And all the little 1, 2, the numbering.
Right. Those are all, I didn't know this, but those are all from a focal point. So if it happens in a room, they may say from the front door, tripod A, or whatever that thing is called, was found, 3.8 feet or 3 feet 8 inches or whatever. This was found this. They have this focal point. So where when they go back inside, the detectives can, lay down stuff and they can recreate it.
Yeah. The
focal point for the detectives that morning was the front of the train.
And at that point,
as soon as it moves, it's useless.
Yeah, because they've ran over the body, so once they move, that's just...
Yeah, their focal point leaves, which was, I don't know, incompetence, or we'll figure out later, The tarp that was laying over those kids.
I've seen so much stuff about the tarp. Like, they say the train people saw it, but then they say they never found a tarp, and they're like, no, we saw it, and they never found a tarp. Yeah. So there's so many conflicting reports about a tarp.
Right.
So many reports.
It keeps coming up, and I was the same way. I was like, is there something on this? Did that tarp say, property of Fred Johnson? And they're like, oh, but I never did find out. I think it may have been something that the police on the scene denied that they were covered up, because that kind of doesn't
fit their theory.
And they just stuck to it.
Or could it just have been destroyed by the train and never found? Who knows?
They would have found something.
Yeah, I guess.
But yeah, they said they found that tarp, but they said they saw it. The police denied that it was ever there. There were a couple of things at the scene that the sheriff of the county, Jim Steed, never showed up. Which they thought, this is a big... 2 people just got killed by a train. That was their theory at the time, anyway, that they were alive, the train hit them, and they were dead. Seems like something... They were kind of weird that he never showed up. People started saying, where's Sheriff Steve? Why isn't he here?
Because, these are... even though it is... This happened in Little Rock... Or
happened in Alexander.
So, small town, even though, it's Arkansas, everything's small town. You would think the sheriff would show up for any big thing.
Right. And just to put this in context, we're from Arkansas. That's one reason I wanted to take this case, because and I'm almost the same age as these kids. I'm about 3 years older than them.
Well, I was 2 weeks old.
I was going to say, one of the reasons I wasn't too much into this is because I just had my first kid right around the time this happened.
Like you said, this happened on Sunday. I was literally 2 weeks old the day this happened.
You were 2 weeks old the day this happened. So, but I was 20 when this happened. Those kids they were 16 and 17. So I was, so I remember this. I remember as this story developed. So I wanted to do it. But Little Rock, I think most people know that's right there in the center of the
state capital.
Anywhere you go from point A to point B in Arkansas, you're almost always going to go through Little Rock. Benton, Bryant, and Alexander are kind of a 3-city. They probably used to be 3 unique cities, but the growth of each city has kind of pushed them into each other, and they're kind of
almost the same,
indistinguishable.
Alexander's kind of like on the outskirts of them, right?
Yeah,
because it's kind of there. It's kind of between Benton Bryant and Little Rock. It's kind of right there.
So you'll hear us say Benton. Benton was the bigger of the three. Bryant is the next, and then Alexander is the third. This happened outside of Alexander in a rural part of Saline County, which they're all in Saline County. So Saline County, because it's the rural part of it, was handled by Sheriff's Department. The city is handled by like Benton PD or Alexander PD or whatever. So that's why it was a big deal that the sheriff hadn't shown up. So they took these boys, gathered them up. I don't know how a more delicate way to say that. And I remember at the time, and I was reminded about this when I was doing my research, they showed them with trash bags, kind of throwing them in the back of a Saline County pickup truck. And the guy had like a cigarette, and he was throwing it in there. And there was a guy in there in the back that was taking them and kind of moving them toward the back to kind of make room for them. And he stepped on one of the bags and kind of tripped. And it was just, it just showed how they were, I don't know, it was very...
Well, and I guess at that point, that's disrespectful no matter how they died. But I guess they were thinking, well, they were killed by the train, so there's not really going to be a big investigation. They weren't trying to really, what's the word I'm thinking of?
Maintain the scene. Yeah. I think that had something to do with it. But when they got the bodies to the medical examiner.
This guy.
Yeah, this guy. His name is Fahmy Malik. He was an Egyptian guy. I think he studied at University of Cairo, came to America and got a job, I think, in Indiana, found his way to Little Rock and got a job as the chief medical examiner.
So he was from 1979 to 1992.
Yeah.
He was
throughout all of the 80s. He was, and I remember that guy. I remember at the time thinking, well, so he said that the boys died because they had smoked 20 marijuana cigarettes and succumbed to marijuana and went into a stupor, asleep, and fell asleep on the tracks.
Listen, as someone who has smoked a lot of marijuana in my life, I can tell you that you're not going to sit in succession and smoke 20 marijuana cigarettes. You're going to smoke about 5. With their age and probably the weed that was available in 87, they probably smoked like 5. And then they were good and stoned and they sat there. But there's no amount of stoned I've ever been that I would have not woken up on train tracks, being laid out on a train track. Even if I got stoned and laid there, if I heard a train, I would have popped up.
Right.
And I don't need... Snoop Dogg Willie Nelson, they could smoke 20 marijuana cigarettes and not succumb to anything.
Yeah.
But
that's...
a 16 and a 17-year-old boy, okay. Sure.
So, and that wasn't the first time he'd messed up. Another thing, the parents, when they went to the state police headquarters, or the crime lab, to see Dr. Malik, and he told them that. And they said he was arrogant and dismissive. Both sets of parents had just lost their son.
And he's basically like, your kids were stoners and they died because they were stoners. And the parents were just like, no.
And when they said that doesn't seem right, he said, well, I can take out the crime scene photos and show you. One, what's he going to show them?
Their mangled bodies.
Right, there's nothing to prove his evidence. Like, here's their femur. See how stoned he was? They can't. And it felt like a threat. It felt like a way to shut them up.
Because he was just, I'm the medical examiner. What do you have?
So he was not very kind, sympathetic, compassionate, nothing like that. And to talk about this guy for a second, there was a crime that happened. The guy's body was sent to the crime lab in the medical examiner's office. He looked at it. The guy was shot 5 times in the chest. and Malik ruled it a suicide.
How?
Well, obviously. Here's the worst one. This really happened. They found a guy who was decapitated, whose head was missing. Malik ruled it liver failure. That really happened. He said it was liver failure.
The liver failed and popped the head off and ate the head?
But he said that the man's dog chewed off his head and then ate his head, skull, lips, hair, brain, and all. This dog ate his head. It wasn't a Great Dane. It was like a normal-sized dog. And they said it was clear to anybody that looked at it, there was a knife that had done that. It wasn't gnawed off by an animal. But he said he tested the dog's vomit and poop and found like brain matter.
It's going to digest bones. Even hyenas that will eat a person will regurgitate the bone.
Well, they found the head later. The head was eventually found after he said it had been eaten. And his remark was that and just kept going. It's absolutely ridiculous. The boys on the track, what happened to Kevin Ives and Don Henry, it wasn't marijuana. They were dead by all accounts. So I didn't say this, but the EMTs at the site, when they got there, they saw the pallor of the skin. Is that how you say pallor? Yeah. Color. I don't know the fancy way of saying color. And the blood. And they wrote in their report, it seems that the deceased were dead when they put
when the train hit them.
They put a remark in there, something of that nature, not knowing it was going to be a thing. And actually later, Linda Ivy, Ives, I'm sorry, take a moment to. None of this would probably happen without her. She was a hero. She fought and fought and fought every day from that date that happened to her son. She constantly took no for an answer. And I think that's why we know so much, which is a lot. I'll just say it's a lot what we know. But she had a meeting with this guy. His name was Billy Heath. He was an EMT. He had written, looked like they were dead or something. And she wanted to talk to him, which, from what I gather, was not out of the realm of normalcy. The
person who finds your
and
loved one's dead body, you want to talk to him.
He wouldn't. He said he didn't want to talk to her. Well, she worked around. She knew someone at the hospital, and that's where the EMTs that's her home base, was the hospital. And she said, I'll get Billy to talk to you. So a couple of days later, she said, yeah, he's fine to talk to you. She shows up at the hospital like 9 o'clock at night, which, paramedics have a strange schedule. And there were 3 Saline County deputies there. And he said, I don't want to talk. And she eventually got out of him that something seemed odd, but she didn't get to talk to him like she wanted to. And she was leaving. She saw either her friend or someone she knew that worked at the hospital that said, every once in a while we'll get a sheriff's deputy come in here for something. I've never seen 3 at 9 o'clock at night.
So all of a sudden, this case, or not all of a sudden, but just at the very beginning, this case is just already looking weird.
Yeah. There's a lot of strange stuff.
Just from the very start.
So she said, this isn't right. My son didn't smoke 20 marijuana cigarettes. But she said this isn't right, what Dr. Malik is saying. So along with some other people that helped her, Curtis Henry was Don's father, and he was part of it as well. They wound up moving to South Arkansas, and obviously they didn't drop it, but they were not nearly as involved as Linda Ives was. But they got an outside person to look at it, and he said these findings that Dr. Malik found are bizarre. He said they had some marijuana in their system.
Maybe 1 or 2 joints.
Yeah, but they were dead when they hit the track. Well, they were dead when that train hit them. Kevin had been hit in the face. He said it looked like from the butt of a gun. And Don had been stabbed.
Because it said his shirt contained evidence of a stab wound to the back.
Yeah. So he said that's what happened. Which sounds, things are falling into place a little bit. Malik was absolutely not. That didn't happen. They weren't dead. And here's another little offshoot, but this one's important. You have to wonder why this man kept getting his job. How did he? They actually wound up giving him a raise after all this stuff was happening. How? I mean, how did he keep his job? An answer may lie with Virginia Kelly. Virginia Kelly was, back in the 60s, 70s, nurses were anesthesiologists.
Or nurse anesthetist.
That's
the
it.
one that's hard to say.
Yeah. Nurse anesthetist. A woman died in her care. They said that there were complications in surgery, and the report was the anesthesiologist had neglected in some way. Virginia Kelly was known as being kind of lackadaisical in the operating room, that this was in Hot Springs where Oaklawn Racing is at, and she was a big fan of the ponies, and she would read the racing report, in surgery while they're doing stuff instead of she obviously says, no, that didn't happen, but she had a reputation as being a bit lackadaisical. She had been doing it a while, so she also had a reputation of, being very knowledgeable. She actually had her own, clinic of anesthesiologists, nurses, that worked for hospitals. But that one was kind of pushed. Right. There was a woman in Hot Springs that got into a altercation. She was white. The altercation was with a black couple. They said there was some racial slurs passed. They were in a car. There was a bottle thrown out of the car at the couple, and the guy picked up a rock or a piece of concrete and threw it in the car. And it hit this girl in the face, and it did some damage. So they took her to the hospital. And her face was pretty messed up. She had like a broken nose and a broken, part of her skull. And so they had to fix her up. They worked first on the lower part of her face. So they had the breathing tube, which the anesthesiologist was responsible for. I may be getting some of this wrong. If someone is much more familiar with medical stuff, I'm getting it wrong. I'm telling you right front. She had the thing in the nose so the girl could breathe. When they swapped and had to start working on the upper part around the nose, they had to take it out of the nose and then put it into her mouth, and it's supposed to go down your trachea into your lungs so you can breathe. I should say, before surgery, she was sitting up in bed. She was in pain, but she was sitting in bed. She was asking questions about the surgery. Her family had shown up. The nurses, said we're going to do some reconstructive surgery, but she's fine. Right.
Now, just to clarify, the girl that was hurt, was this part of the black couple, or is this the white woman?
It was a white woman in the car.
Okay.
When Virginia Kelly put the tube into her mouth, she put it into her esophagus, which I've talked to doctors about this, and they say it's kind of difficult to get that right.
I've watched a lot of Grey's Anatomy. It happens.
Yeah, I've seen Scrubs talks about that too. But she tried it a couple of times, and there was vomit in the tube after a little bit. And then she kept getting it wrong. one of the doctors had to take over, but at that point she had gone into cardiac arrest.
Yeah, and at some point, messing with that so much, everything starts to close up.
Yeah, she passed away on the table. And by all accounts, she passed away because of ineptitude in the operating room and not because she had a rock thrown at her, right? If she had had competent medical care in that operating room, chances are great chances that she would have survived, but she didn't. The family, at this point, Virginia Kelly's got a bad name, right? She's been kind of responsible, however you want to look at it, for 2 deaths. The doctors said it was definitely malpractice on her part. She did this. This was her responsibility. They sent the body to the medical examiner. Dr. Malik said, "Oh, she died of blunt force trauma. It was a homicide. She was killed." No mention of what went on in that operating room. So Virginia Kelly there was no charges. The family had filed suit. They didn't win. Virginia Kelly came out fine. I think she found it difficult to get work after that, but she didn't face any repercussions from her supposed alleged malpractice. Virginia Kelly, you know who she is?
This is Bill Clinton's mother.
Bill Clinton's mother. So there's your connection, if you're into that. Those things are true, what I just said. Did that impact Bill Clinton?
And was he governor?
He was governor, exactly. That should have.
So, I mean, he was governor at the moment when all this was going on.
And he was being governor over the crime lab and over Dr. Malik, which you have to imagine, if the governor had wanted him gone, if the governor said, this is not acceptable, he wouldn't have been there. But he stayed on 5 years after Kevin Ives and Don Henry. He stayed on, and he had already not had a good reputation. But now things were starting to roll in her favor, Linda's favor, we think, at this point. The doctor said they were killed before they were put on the track. It looks like they were murdered. The findings were changed from accidental to homicide. But she was approached by a man named Richard Garrett, and his partner was a man named Dan Harmon. She initially really didn't know what to think about him, but she quickly realized he seems like he wants to get this solved. And Dan Harmon really took over at this point. He, with Richard Garrett's help, they got a grand jury together. A grand jury was formed to look into this, and Dan Harmon took on the role of special prosecutor, and started calling in people and finding out. Now, grand jury stuff is secret, that you can't. So she didn't know exactly what was going on. She knew Dan was doing something. So word started getting out that people were looking into this. Okay. There was a man named Keith McCaskill, and he owned this bar. And he was found dead. He was stabbed like 50 times from the waist up. And they were like, this had to be something. This was not, Keith McCaskill he knew how to fight. He knew how to take care of himself. And they wound up arresting a 19-year-old kid that weighed like 140 pounds that lived across the street from him. And everybody at that moment was like, oh, Keith would have eaten him.
Yeah.
This is not what happened. That's what they went with. And the kid obviously said it wasn't me. Now, he said that he saw something happen at Keith's house, and he went over there, and there were men there, and these men threatened him, and they cut his hand and dripped it into the pool of blood so his blood would show up, and he walked through the blood and slipped in it, and they're like, your footprints are... So they intimidated this kid. So, at a first glance, you can see how the police may go, that sounds right.
That has to have some forethought to it to say, oh, this kid comes over and it's like, we're going to cut that. That's some mastermind criminal kind of stuff there. Well, maybe not mastermind, but
Yeah.
they've done stuff like that before.
Yeah.
If they're going to intimidate a teenager by cutting him, making him bleed. And
So he died over the course of the next few months, years. I've seen 9 to 12 people that were connected to this case died. More than a few of them murdered. One guy he was on his motorcycle and ran into the back of a semi, and that killed him. So they said it was a vehicular accident, not even manslaughter. He just had a wreck. But people said, well, he was being chased. People on the road said he was scared and being chased. That's one of the suspicious. McCaskill is one. There's a slew of people that died. And I looked up the Saline County deaths here recently, and like last year they had 4, and the year before they had 0. So it's not like a murder capital, Saline County, but a lot of people died back then. So Don Harmon is, he's really been a big part of this. He's working, he's trying to get this solved. But, Linda starts realizing, there's a lot of wind blowing, but nothing's moving. There's a lot of stuff happening, but nothing's happening. Word starts coming out on this guy, Harmon, that he does a little coke and he slaps his wife around, and it was the 80s in a small town, and they were like, oh, that's Dan, he likes to beat women and do drugs, and oh, crazy Dan. He was actually elected in Saline County as the county prosecutor. He was elected to a position with this knowledge about him.
Welcome to Arkansas.
Yeah, right. So they started looking deeper into this. And now at this point, Linda still thought, Dan was trying. She got a call. He called her and said, hey, I'm going to be at court. Could you come down here? Which was odd. She wasn't used to hearing this. She met him, and when they left, there were a lot of people out there taking pictures, and she kind of realized, he's not here for me. I'm here for him.
To look good.
I am a photo op, and he's taking advantage of the fact that I'm grieving and all this, and they're like, look how good I am. She's on my side. Well, there was a lady not in the audience, but as part of that crowd. His name was Jean Duffy. And she remarked to someone, that guy's using her. Dan Harmon's using Linda Ives. Jean Duffy was she was hired by the Saline County to head up a drug task force. And she hired a bunch of undercover agents, and they started looking into stuff. Her boss told her, you're not to use this office for looking into officials. But this is where her information was going. She started getting stuff. Dan Harmon's name kept coming up.
What kind of knowledge did the boss have when he's like, you can do this job, but don't look into officials? Like, what part did he play in it?
Geez, this is indicative of the whole thing. The more I started reading this, it's absolutely insane. The level of corruption and callousness that these people, it's unfathomable. And you hear this all the time. This guy who, away from this case, just a generic example, some official with the government, a prosecuting attorney or a district attorney or a governor or a chief of police, somebody that has, a little gravitas with the government, they get found to be doing drugs or having shady business practices or doing all this, and it's overlooked. Or sometimes they just know the system so well. They know what buttons to push, and they know where to go, and they know what to do, and they know people. People are trying to help them, and you do these crimes all the time. I mean, one after another. Racketeering and drugs and drug or all. And nothing happens to them. Then you get some freaking kid who gets pulled over for speeding, who's got a roach in his car and maybe, some bag of weed in his pocket or something. And the kid winds up doing 2 or 3 years and ruins his life. And you hear this.
A big politician can be found with a lot of coke, and it's like, oh, nothing.
Yeah.
That's not going to be on the news or anything. And the reporter who wrote about it is gone.
Yeah, he gets fired or worse. And one thing I found just hilarious about Harmon was he was eventually caught or arrested for tax evasion. Like, he didn't file taxes for 1985 or something like that. So they got him on that, and he went to court, and it was like, okay, yeah, you got me. I didn't do taxes.
Well, wasn't he arrested for dealing drugs?
Well, yes.
Oh.
Spoiler. But he gets, so he's in court. They go over all this stuff. And
so he was arrested for the tax evasion before this case, you're saying?
No, after this case,
okay.
But it was, the evasion happened before this case. This was in 88 when he was arrested. 89, it happened in 85, 86. And so they're going through the motions. He's going to get out. It's not a big deal, blah, blah, blah. One of the conditions of his release was he had to submit to a drug test. And they said that he leaned over to his attorney, and his attorney said, we won't be doing that. And they're like, and the judge was like, well, I mean, yeah, you're going to. And he said, we won't, you can't do that. And he goes, well, okay, yeah, you don't have to, but we'll just escort you to your cell. You're not getting out. And he started wrapping himself in the Constitution. And I think he even made that statement that this was unconstitutional. I was arrested for financial stuff. It has nothing to do with drugs. And in theory, I agree with that. I mean, testing somebody for drugs when they're not related to drugs, it's just a way to...
But fighting it so hard, it's like, why are you fighting it so hard?
Yeah. I mean, it was... And I think like a few days later, after he'd been in jail for a week, he submitted. It's like, well, it's out of your system now, tough guy. I mean, it just seemed very blatant, And it was, everyone knew about it, and they just didn't care, But this Jean Duffy found out about a lot of this stuff. And she was behind a lot of it. Okay? This was before he was elected to prosecuting attorney or district attorney. I don't know. She started putting word out kind of surreptitiously. Dan Harmon's behind a lot of this. He found out about it. First thing he did was start bad-mouthing her.
Now, when you say behind a lot of this, like behind...
The drugs.
Okay.
The drugs. She was head of the drug traffic.
Okay.
So she said that he's behind some of it. He went to people he knew, and he's like, this crazy bitch, and Jean Duffy's just crazy, and kind of went into the media, and they started saying she was overstepping her bounds. And then he was elected to an office, a law enforcement office. He put out a warrant for her arrest.
Wow. Because
she was doing this, because she had said these things about him, and he turned it around and said she was responsible for some of it. And she wound up going into hiding. Somebody she knew owned a cabin in South Arkansas, and she went down there and lived. And her family would come see her from time to time, but she was living in, secrecy, so they couldn't find her. And she wound up moving to Houston and becoming a teacher because of what Dan Harmon had done to her. And from everything I can gather, she seems to be on the up and up. She really wanted to help. She thought things were bad. She was trying to make them good. And she was run out of town. Dan Harmon just did what he did. So they started talking to more people, trying to find out just what was going on. There was a woman named Charlene Wilson. Charlene Wilson wound up giving a written account of what had happened. She said she had taken a friend of hers to that area, a friend she knew that was in drugs. This was the night of August 23rd, right? That Saturday night that the boys were killed. She took a friend of hers, they drove down there and she stayed in the car, right? He was going for a drug drop. There were planes flying in, dropping off drugs in that area, and he was going to pick it up. After a bit, she went to see what they were doing or why they were taking so long or whatever. She said she was on meth or coke or both. And when she got there, there were a couple of people standing around. There were two boys who, one was dead, the other seemed to be dying. They gave her a knife and she wound up stabbing one of the other boys. And they wound up putting these two boys on the railroad tracks, hoping that it would just look like they got hit by a train. And she named the people there. One was Keith McCaskill, who...
So he was in on the drug.
He was one of the ones that was killed. The other, the person she went there with, Dan Harmon.
Oh, wow.
She named Dan Harmon as the other one. There was another group of kids who happened to be in this area. They saw some stuff going on. They saw some violence occurring, and they took off running. You know, they were younger. They were like 12 or so, like 3 or 4 of them. One of the kids wound up giving testimony that said he saw the people there that night, and he saw these two boys. And he said, my mother used to date one of the guys. I knew him on sight, and his name is Dan Harmon. So there were two independent people that put Dan Harmon at the scene when Kevin Ives and Don Henry were killed.
Wow.
Absolutely. And he was the one that was doing, and I guess he took over so he could direct the investigation.
And find out any evidence and stuff they had, so he could be like, and so maybe somebody comes forward knowing information and they see him and they're like, oh shit, well, you're who I saw.
But someone else saw an incident. I looked this up on Google Maps today. It's still there. There's an area not too far from where the boys were found on the tracks where there used to be a little store. And there was a payphone out in front of it. And this was late at night, like 2 or 3 in the morning. And they saw these two people beating the crap out of these two boys. And they were Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane. That's what they said, right?
That they were the ones beating the crap out of them.
They beat these boys up. So what it looks like happened, what I can piece together is Kevin Ives and Don Henry saw this drug drop going down. Some people say they knew about it and they were trying to steal some so they could sell it at school, which this very sad to me that, you know, this happened. They went out Saturday night with their friends, and then they went out late Saturday night, early Sunday to go hunting in the woods. That Monday was the first day of school. They would have been seniors. So this was like the last weekend of summer, you know, but they said some people said, well, they knew about the drugs. They were going to take some and try to sell them at school. Other people said they didn't. Other people said there was a big money drop, and sometimes money could be found there. I think that's one of those things that's nebulous right now. You don't know 100% why Kevin and Don were there at that moment.
And really, why they were there, none of that matters. As to none of that is reason for them to have been killed.
So they saw what was happening and ran. Dan Harmon called the police, not like you and I would call it, but he called some friends he knew who were also police officers, said what happened. This Jay Campbell and Kirk Lane were law enforcement officers for Pulaski County Sheriff's Office. Pulaski County is Little Rock, and so Pulaski and Saline County butt up against each other. So yeah, these two guys were law enforcement officers who caught the kids, Kevin and Don, presumably, beat them, possibly killed Kevin with a gun, brought them back, and Dan ordered them thrown on the tracks. Did you look up or find anything about a guy named Billy Jack Haynes? Does that name?
No.
Billy Jack Haynes was a wrestler back in the 80s. And if you look him up from the 80s, he was a scary looking dude. He was what you think of when you think of an 80s wrestler. Just a big, intimidating son of a gun. And he said that he did work. He was into coke. He did a lot of coke.
Oh, yeah. Looking at images right now.
And he said he would get these calls sometimes to get free drugs to do some security for these drug dealers.
Oh, you know what? Now, I remember reading about the security for it. I just didn't remember the guy's name. But
So he shows up in Bryant, Arkansas to do some security for these drug dealers. And he was there that night. He said it was Dan that put these kids on the track. He said Dan Harmon's the one that... He didn't kill them. He was responsible for them being put on the track and knew what happened. He had a lot of the information right. Like, he knew things. So he had either done a lot of investigation on his own to make this story up, or he was telling the truth. I think to this day, people are still skeptical because it seems so outlandish. Linda Ives is said to believe him. I've read that 2 or 3 times that Linda Ives believed him, but I can't find that. That's like other people saying, oh, she believed him. I can't find anything where her saying that. And sadly, she passed away just about a year ago.
Oh, wow. I was just about to ask.
Yeah,
so you did a lot more research on this case because you actually read a book about it.
Yeah. I read The Boys on the Track by Mara Leverett, which is amazing. I mean, it's dense. There's a lot going on. Like, we're almost at an hour, and it's like riding a roller coaster. All we're hitting is the very top. There are things going on. Like he said, Dan Harmon was getting his information from someone else to do this, how to handle this situation. And the person he was getting his orders from was Bill Clinton.
There's so much. I mean, we can't even dive into all that today, but just going in and finding out, because I think with Dr. Fahmy Malik, however you said his name, I read that there were 22 cases that were tied to the Clintons that he had stuff to do with, where he hid stuff. I mean, and just I guess this would be 2 cases, Don Henry and Kevin Ives, and then his one about his mother. But so 19 other cases that that tied to the Clintons.
I'm not a conspiracy guy. That these drugs had been dropped, they looked at how was this happening in freaking Benton, Arkansas. Not to say anything about Benton, I'm from a small town in Arkansas too, and it's not that, but why Benton, Arkansas? Why Saline County, Arkansas? They trace that back to something I think maybe a lot more people have heard about, Mena, Arkansas.
The Barry Seal.
Barry Seal. His name came up a lot. He was flying drugs for the Medellin cartel, was taking them at first to Baton Rouge, and it got hot, and he found this little town of Mena that had an airport. It was convenient. It's a place he could take the drugs. He says he never really ran drugs out of Mena. That was more of a spot that he would get his planes fixed and put this really fancy, sophisticated equipment in this little podunk place. But there's a movie with Tom Cruise called American Made that's about Barry Seal and Mena, and it's highly dramatic or stylized. It's not true. Like, Barry Seal they called him the fat man. He was like 300 something pounds, 6'4", 6'5". Tom Cruise is like 5'2". So it's not. But Barry Seal was running. It was a huge deal. And Barry Seal was found to be doing this in Mena. They knew he was there doing some stuff. And the west side, whatever that's like, called the 7th District for Arkansas, the attorney over that wouldn't press charges against him, would not bring charges against him, even though they knew this was going on. That attorney, do you know who that attorney was? Asa Hutchinson.
Oh, wow.
Who is, if you don't know, our governor right now. So this is I'm telling you, man, it's all over the place.
And I'm sure other states, we're from Arkansas, so we're just like, you're not even surprised by the stuff going on in Arkansas. I'm sure other states that maybe know but just all the corruption that Arkansas has, and then you say these names, and I'm just not even surprised. It's just, I'm not shocked by it.
But you know what? I'm not either, and by God, we should be. You know what I mean? This is not the way that things should be operating. We're so used to it. We're so used to this corruption and stuff, and it got these 2 kids killed. Who knows who else? I mean, 9 to 10 other people died just around this case.
There was a friend of theirs, Keith Coney.
He was the one that died on the motorcycle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was with them that night, and then left them. I think he was the one that saw those 2 cops beat them up. He had like, "Hey, I'll see you guys later," and had moved away and was in that area and saw Kevin and Don getting the crap beat out of them by 2 cops. So yeah, he had went and told his mom something was up, and they interviewed her, and she said he was afraid for his life, and said people were after him, and he was right. I mean, he wound up dying. With, again, 10 other people that knew about this case wound up dead. The kid, the 12-year-old that saw that night and said my mom was dating Dan Harmon, dead. He's dead. The woman that filled out that paper, that she wrote the thing saying I took Dan Harmon down there and I saw Charlene Wilson. She's still alive.
What about Dan Harmon? Where's he?
Dan Harmon was eventually arrested for all of this, the drug part of it. He was arrested, sent to prison, got out of prison, went down to Sheridan, Grant County, in Arkansas, was arrested within like 2 months for doing drugs, running drugs down there. Like, he got out of Benton, Saline County, thinking I'll be safe down here, and was picked up again and was put back in prison. This was like 2012, something like that. And if you look him up now, it doesn't say he's dead, so I assume he's still alive in prison. Here's the theory that's going, that I believe, is Barry Seal was running those drugs. He either dropped them off there in Benton, or someone else did, but it was part of that drug running from Columbia to Mena. There were people in the government who were untouchable, who were getting the drugs. People we haven't even mentioned. Again, this book is... you have to watch this book. Watch this book. You have to read this book. Kevin and Don got mixed up in it. I think they probably just saw it. They knew something was going on. I really don't think a 16 and 17-year-old boy in 1987 in rural Arkansas were trying to steal cocaine to sell it at school. Mm-hmm. People were doing weed. But you're not like walking into algebra class going, who wants Coke in Arkansas? I just, at that time, right? So I don't think they were going to start dealing Coke, right? They may have been trying to steal some money. They probably just saw something they shouldn't have seen. I really don't think Clinton was that deep into it. I don't think Dan Harmon wasn't calling Bill Clinton and saying, hey, what do we do with these 2 kids? And Bill's like, throw them on the tracks. Mm-hmm. But Dan just figured, yeah, they're dead and or dying. Somebody will just put them there, and it was like, oh, they got hit by a train. It's a tragedy. Move on. And Linda Ives wouldn't have that shit. She said, we're going to find out what happened. Dan said, I need to cover my butt. I'm the one she's looking for. He went to her and said, I'm going to do this. We need to find out who did it. So that kept the heat off of him for years. He was the one asking questions, and was asking questions that would lead away from him, and he's yet to be prosecuted at all for this. It's all been for the drugs, which he spent a lot of time in prison. So at the end of the day, good. But
the fact that there's no actual real justice for these kids. I mean, they were
right.
kids.
Yeah. Yeah, they were, I think, they were innocent. Like we said, Linda passed away about a year ago. She would go out to Kevin's grave every year on the anniversary. So hopefully now, if you believe in this kind of stuff, she didn't have to go to his grave to see him. She's with him, whatever.
And so it's been, I mean, this happened almost 35 years ago.
Yeah.
In just a couple weeks, 35 years. Like,
and no one's been charged in it. It's still an open case. If you go back and look at the sheriffs that have been Saline County sheriffs, no one's tried. You know, there has been 2 sheriffs since then, not counting Jim Steed. 2 sheriffs of Saline County since then have been arrested for fraud and conspiracy and drugs. And I mean, I don't know what it is about Saline County, but there's some stuff going down there. But that's where we're at right now. I don't know what's going to happen. Without Linda spearheading this, I feel like there was a guy that apparently had picked it up at one point. I don't remember his name. He started a GoFundMe for Kevin and Don to get resources. Linda, I think at one point said, "Okay, well, thank you," but eventually she said, "Look, he's not associated with us." And I went to the GoFundMe page, and he was asking for money, and then there was a Linda Ives, either her or somebody that pretended to be her, but I assume it was her, said, "We're not affiliated with this. Please don't give him money." And the next post by him was, "I still have debt incurred from trying to figure this out, so I'd appreciate any money." So, and it was at $12,000 or something. I don't know what happened with that, but if you run across that, I would stay away from it. It looks like it's crap. But yeah, without Linda, I don't know if anybody's going to take this up. It's still an open case.
And while this is it's a big case in Arkansas, and I think I've maybe listened to one other podcast that's done an episode on this, and I've listened to a lot. This is another, not unsolved. I mean, it's unsolved, but it's not really. It's right. Just trying to get good people in power that can, get rid of the corruption, make people held responsible for the shit they do like this.
Mm-hmm. So,
because 2 innocent teenage boys didn't have to die, and their mother spent, 34 years of her life just...
Yeah. Well, I'll end with this. There's a site called ID Files, and that stands for Ives and Duffy. Gene Duffy and Linda Ives. And it's their website where they had a lot of information about this. There was a guy that ran the site for them, who's like, when you go there and try to see who runs it, it's not their names, it's this guy's name. You know what I mean? These people that run these sites. He started getting death threats from Thailand, which were obviously rerouted through, and stopped working on the site. And this was not, 30 years ago. So the site seems to be, it's still a lot of information there. I use that site for a lot of stuff, ID Files. But it's not been updated. You can tell some of the information. Not that the information is old. It's just there doesn't seem to be a lot of new.
It's not updated. It was whenever it was put in there, it was correct.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of it. Most of it's still correct, but there's nothing new. And there's also a YouTube channel called Carnage on Ice, who, if you want to read about this, Boys on the Track by Mara Leverett is amazing. But if you're not a reader and you have the time and you want to sit down, Carnage on Ice does multiple videos about this. And he goes into it pretty deep. He's got files from the police departments and stuff. Really good information. But you're looking at, block out 3, 4, 5 hours of your day or from a week to sit down and watch. But it's a lot of stuff. It extends, Colombia and outside of the United States, obviously outside of Arkansas. Different people's names that we haven't brought up that are big in this case, just because
there's so many.
When you have the time, dive into this case, see the corruption and the just all the stuff this poor woman went through, it'd be worth your time. So I got nothing else.
Oh.
Okay, so I guess we're out, and hope you'll join us for the next one.
Thanks, and good night.
Good night.